For over 1,000 years, two great rivers of faith flowed across the Indian subcontinent. One was Bhakti, a current of ecstatic personal devotion. The other was Sufism, a stream of Islamic mysticism. And where they met? Wow, they sparked a spiritual revolution that challenged empires, broke down social barriers, and completely changed the sound of faith in South Asia. This right here is the radical question at the very heart of the movement. I mean, just think about it. Forget all the rigid dogma, the complex ceremonies. What if connecting with the divine was as simple and as intense as falling in love? That single powerful idea, that's the key to understanding this entire story. Okay, so this slide lays out the battle lines perfectly. On one side, you have the established order, right? Religion defined by really complicated rituals, a strict social hierarchy like the caste system, and sacred texts in languages like Sanskrit that, let's be honest, only the elite could even understand. But on the other side, this new devotional faith comes along and proposes something totally different. It was all about raw, personal emotion. It welcomed everyone, no matter their caste, and it was expressed in the languages of ordinary people. A real game changer. Now, to really grasp just how big of a revolution this was, we have to understand the world it burst into. By the mid-first millennium, the religious landscape was pretty much dominated by huge temples and Brahminical ideas. It was a very structured system, often led by a priestly class. But underneath that official surface, other ideas were stirring. Sociologists have a great way of framing this. They talk about a dynamic between two types of traditions. You've got the great tradition, that's the formal, top-down religion of priests and kings. But everywhere you also had these little traditions, the local, everyday beliefs of farmers and artisans. The real magic, the real innovation, started when these two traditions began to interact, to blend, and to challenge each other. So, our first river, the Bhakti movement, begins right here. The first sparks of this revolution didn't fly from the big centers of power. Nope, they came from the south. This was a movement that was literally born in song, a wave of passionate, personal devotion that spread from one town to the next. The earliest leaders were these amazing poet saints, the Alvars, who were devoted to Vishnu, and the Nayanars, devoted to Shiva. And what they did was revolutionary. They traveled from place to place, singing hymns not in Sanskrit, but in Tamil, the language of the people. They actively challenged the caste system, and their ranks included incredible women saints who became powerful spiritual leaders in their own right. And this quote, wow, it just brilliantly illustrates how radical they were. This is from Karayakal Amiyar, a Nayanar saint. She's describing herself as a demoness, completely throwing away traditional ideas of what feminine beauty should be, all to show the sheer intensity of her devotion to Shiva. This wasn't just a spiritual protest. It was a deep social and cultural one, too. This critique of just empty ritualism, it really started to spread. A few centuries later, in Karnataka, a leader named Basavana used these sharp, witty sayings, like this one, to expose what he saw as total religious hypocrisy. It really hammers home the movement's core message: genuine feeling and doing the right thing were worth so much more than just hollow performative rituals. Okay, now for our second river, Sufism. As Islam spread into India, it didn't just bring armies and rulers. It also brought mystics. Sufism was a path within Islam that, a lot like Bhakti, emphasized a direct, loving, and deeply personal connection with God. And here's a really fascinating parallel. The first Sufis were protesters themselves. They were reacting against the growing wealth and political materialism of the caliphate. They felt the institution was becoming way too worldly, so they turned inward. They sought a personal experience of God through love and devotion, not just by following dogmatic rules. Sound familiar? So, to organize themselves, Sufis developed something called the silsila, which literally means a chain. You can think of it as an unbroken spiritual lineage from a master, or a sheikh, to their disciple, the murid. This chain stretches all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, and it was the channel through which spiritual knowledge and blessings were passed down through the generations. The real heart of Sufi life in India was the khanqa, or hospice. But believe me, these places were so much more than just monasteries. They were buzzing community centers with open kitchens, where absolutely anyone, a soldier, a slave, a merchant, a poet, a Hindu, Muslim, it didn't matter, could come for spiritual guidance, a hot meal, or just a safe place to rest. This is where Sufism really met India on the ground level. And now we arrive at the climax of our story. Up in North India, these two great rivers, the passionate devotion of Bhakti and the mystical love of Sufism, they finally met. And their confluence created some of the most powerful and enduring spiritual voices in all of Indian history. Perhaps no one embodies this meeting of rivers better than Kabir, a 15th century poet saint. Just listen to his words. He fiercely challenged the very idea that Hindus and Muslims were worshiping different gods. He argued that names like Allah and Ram, they were just different labels for the same, single, ultimate reality. And you can see this beautiful synthesis perfectly reflected in his language. He would just freely draw upon words from Islam, like Allah and Pir. Then he'd use terms from Vedantic philosophy, like Nirakar, which means formless. And he even pulled from yogic traditions with concepts like shunya, or emptiness. His poetry was a living, breathing conversation between all of these great faiths. Around the same time, you have Baba Guru Nanak, whose teachings would go on to form the basis of Sikhism. He really crystallized so many of these ideas. He also advocated for nirguna bhakti, devotion to a formless God. He rejected the outward rituals of both Hinduism and Islam, and he taught a simple, direct path: just remember and repeat the divine name. So, what did all this lead to? This wasn't just a flash in the pan. The combined river of Bhakti Sufi thought carved a deep and lasting channel into the cultural bedrock of the subcontinent. Its legacy is still very, very much alive today. Take Mirabai Abai, a Rajput princess from the 16th century. She was married into a super powerful royal family, but she defied her husband, she defied her society, and declared the god Krishna her one true lover. This quote, it just shows her incredible courage. By putting her devotion to God above the authority of the king, she showed the movement's enduring power to challenge any earthly power, whether it was royal or patriarchal. The sheer scope of this story is just immense. We're talking about something that spanned nearly 1,000 years. It kicked off with those early poet saints in the South way back in the 6th century. It continued with the arrival of the Sufis in the 12th, and it all culminated in the great synthesis of figures like Kabir, Nanak, and Mirabai in the 15th and 16th centuries. This was a long, continuous revolution of the heart. Just think about that. Over 1,000 years. A whole millennium of saints, poets, and mystics who were constantly questioning, constantly evolving, and constantly redefining what it means to be devoted. This wasn't a single static event. It was a dynamic, living process that fundamentally shaped the music, the literature, and the culture we see all across South Asia today. And that brings us to our final question. Really, this history isn't locked away in the past. From the Qawwali music you might hear at a Sufi shrine, to the poetry of Kabir that's still sung by folk singers, to the very foundations of faiths practiced by millions, how do you see these ancient songs of love and dissent echoing in the world around you today?